Guys, this latest chapter of One Piece was so damn hype, it is ridiculous. I mean, Oda really and truly put his whole foot into this one, because every time it felt like we were nearing the conclusion of the chapter, it just kept on going and kept getting better and better. With the previous chapter, we received confirmation that every member of the Tobiropo had been defeated. Elsewhere, Luffy had just finished eating a month's worth of food and was plump and pumped. At the same time, Fukurokuju and Raizo would face off against one another. In another location, Killer and Hawkins would do the very same. However, although Hawkins was running low on straw dolls that would absorb damage in his stead, he did still have one connected to Kid. And so if Killer were to take the life of Hawkins, he would firstly have to kill his own captain. From there, we would have King and Queen blazing a path of carnage as they punish the treacherous lot among them. All the while, Marco was pretty low on stamina and sitting things out. Sanji was having trouble dealing with them both at the same time by his lonesome, as Zoro's miracle drug had yet to take effect. And while Sanji was distracted, the opportunist that is Perospero would try taking advantage of the situation, but will be thwarted by Nekomamushi. Eventually, King would target Zoro, attempting to dispatch of him before he could fully recuperate, but was stopped by Marco. Marco would then bring up an old tale he had heard of some time ago about a race of people atop the Red Line who could burst into flames, something King would not respond to. However, Marco would quickly relinquish his place in this fight, as now it was time for the stars to take the stage, as Zoro and Sanji would suddenly unleash a combination attack on the two. Now concluding that once they win this fight, they will be able to catch a glimpse of Luffy as the king of the pirates. With this latest chapter, we would open up to Zoro and Sanji standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Zoro's healing was successful, however the dangers of its aftermath would still be an issue later on. But for now at least, King and Queen were on the ground. At this point, a grunt would set their sights on Zoro, but would be cut down by Kawamatsu. And with that, Hyogoro would tell his guys not to let anyone interfere with their duel, not friend or foe. What was an expression of the ever honor-bound ways of the samurai, as this fight clearly meant a lot to Zoro and Sanji. Now at this point, Marco would continue to stare at King as he remembered the words of his late captain, Whitebeard. At the time, during a conversation with his old man, he expressed that he thought only Mary Joyce was above the Red Line, but Whitebeard would respond by saying that he was referring to the distant past, that back then, God's land was up there, as a younger Marco then questioned when Whitebeard began believing in such things. And Marco was so lost in thought that Izo had to save him from harm's way, telling him to wake up. He would also question how Marco could have possibly spaced out like that in the middle of an active battlefield, but Marco would respond that he was sure Izo would have his back, then asking him if he believed in God. And to Izo, this just sounded like Whitebeard back when he was drunk. But now getting back to the fight between Zoro and Sanji versus King and Queen, Queen would say that the last blow the two had delivered did not even hurt, that they would need to try a bit harder if they hoped to take them down. That as two of Kaido's three calamities, their unstoppable toughness is why they are considered to be all-stars. And as he fired off several shots, Sanji would make a certain sound of strain, which Zoro would question. Apparently, since his second time using the raid suit, he'd been feeling a bit off, which is surely the precursor to a new development in his power, but more on that in a bit. Zoro would make sure that Sanji would not slow him down, as Sanji would again clarify that his body just felt a bit off. At this point, King would draw his blade, as Zoro would repel it with two of his own as he leapt over the shoulder of Sanji. And as Queen went to attack Zoro, Sanji would repel his metal arm with a blazing kick. And just then, Queen would recall that all of Judge's children were cybernetically enhanced, then seeking to confirm that Sanji's leg too was some sort of augmentation. However, Sanji would refute this sentiment by declaring that he was just a regular human unlike his siblings. And to this, Queen would question if Sanji was an idiot, as his leg literally burst into flames and it's not like he's a Lunarian. And based on the reaction of King to this, it would seem that he himself is a Lunarian. And with lunar being right there at the forefront of the name, we may presume some sort of connection to the moon. This is some crazy stuff, guys, because we know the moon to be a very important location and presence in the world of One Piece, also known by the Skypians, a race of people that also possess wings, to be the Fairy Verth, the likes of which Enel had visited and found the Automata, a collection of small robots created by an ancient people within the ruins of Burka. So yes, the moon is very important, yet to possess the power of flame is an interesting combination of concepts that I cannot wait to see properly explored. Now it's hard to know if King will tie into the story of Sun God Naika at all, considering he was on the same crew as Who's Who for a long time, yet Who's Who still had unanswered questions. That being said, King does seem to be a bit reserved, so maybe it's not that far-fetched. But getting back to Sanji, he would relate his fire to the fact that his passions burn hotter than any real flame could, which is something I was willing to subscribe to before it was brought back up here. For as wacky as the world of One Piece may be, there is, even if not available to us immediately, a reason for everything. Sanji may very well have been augmented in a fashion unlike his siblings, to the point where he'd be unaware of it for this long. But in using the Germa suit, he may have jump-started the progression of his bodily modifications, and perhaps on account of this difference, his potential would be that much more incredible. But yeah, Sanji would Ferris wheel his legs against the hardened exterior of Queen, and the cyborg would then boast about his enhancements being superior to even the creations of Dr. Vegapunk, which I highly doubt considering what we get later with this chapter, but whatever. Now King did actually look elsewhere at the mention of the Lunarians, and so Zoro would tell him to not get distracted as their blades would clash yet again. But King's blade acted like a key, which caught Zoro's in its grooves, as he flung them away and proceeded with a nasty sucker punch to the face. From there, Zoro would withstand it thanks to the sword in his mouth, and would now come to the understanding that King likes to fight dirty, as King would reply that he never understood why someone would stick to traditional forms and such in the midst of real combat. And Zoro couldn't complain since the guy never claimed to be a swordsman or anything, but would say that if King's going to fight like that, then he might just follow suit, as he could not afford to lose here. And in looking at all of this, Kawamatsu would speak to Hyogoro about when Lady Hiyori offered Zoro Odin's sword, Enma, that at the time he honestly couldn't show too much resistance. And Hyogoro could clearly see what he meant, that despite being a foreign pirate, he was incredibly similar to the former daimyo of Ringo, Shimotsuki Ushimaru. As Kawamatsu would say, even their sword handling was the same, which is quite the extreme similarity, as Zoro has a very outlandish sword style. But to take things even further, Ushimaru was a direct descendant of the god of the blade, Shimotsuki Ryuma, the zombie which Zoro received Shusui from after emerging victorious. Kawamatsu would consider this to be a degree of fate, as after all, Ryuma too was a one-eyed samurai. Now this is hype. I don't want to go too far into our speculation with this discussion, but wow, Zoro just keeps getting cooler and cooler. After this, we would have Jack versus the Duke. Jack would speak of how he'd forgiven the Minks for sheltering the samurai, as they had suffered quite a lot for their deception. But the Duke did not mind at all, as they would not have been able to live with themselves if they had sold Raizo out, as he would then grip onto the trunk of Jack and throw him right through a wall in what was an incredible display of strength. That everything they had gone through was for them to get to this point, that for 20 years they had been tormented by their questions of uncertainty. And suddenly, on account of a hole in the wall, the Duke had entered his Sulong form. And like the prior sentiments of Raizo and all the other samurai, he was willing to lay down his life to usher in the dawn of the new world. At this time, Nekomamushi would have a score of his own to settle, as he would approach a down Perospero. He would tell Pedro to pour himself a drink from the heavens above and watch, as now, with him also being in his Sulong form, he would promise to claim the life of Perospero. Inside the castle, Raizo and Fukurokuju were still fighting. Fukurokuju would mock Raizo for serving a child, but Raizo would rebut that everyone needs time to mature, and that if misfits like them could become samurai, then with Wano shaping Momonosuke's growth, he would be just fine. Meanwhile, at the port, we would have the Heart Pirates and Caribou terrified and drawing weapons, as apparently Kaido was here. As we would then see a fully grown Momonosuke in his dragon form with Luffy standing before him. This is incredible. This man looks so damn cool. I mean, this is better than I could have ever expected, and at that, Dr. Vegapunk is clearly a god to have been able to make this artificial devil fruit, because good lord is this insane. And so with that, perhaps a caveat would be that Momonosuke does not have access to hybrid forms, it is just all or nothing, which is not a bad power to possess when you can turn into a friggin' dragon. Now Luffy would look at him and think back to their first meeting. He would then call out to him, as Momonosuke would respond to confirm that it was in fact him. As it turns out, Shinobu had aged him up until he was 28 years old. Oh man, I did not expect that much of a jump, but that is perfect. It is exactly what he would have been at this point in time. Now Luffy did not know that this was something Shinobu could do and would wonder why she was crying, as she could not help but cry because of the uncanny resemblance between Momonosuke and his father, Lord Odin, which is just so ridiculously hype. But now, the two were ready to take back Wano, and that was the chapter. And oh my lord, what a chapter it was. There was just so much to it. Honestly, this could have been split into 3 separate chapters and I don't think anyone would complain. I mean, the overwhelming excitement I have been talking about that I hold for these two characters returning to the battle is uncanny, especially considering Kaido is so assured of his own victory. One Piece brings hype unlike any series out there, period. And so if you enjoyed the chapter and our coverage of it, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best One Piece content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.